ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Friday edition of Point of View, and as always, if you would like to join us a little bit later, we will open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation. Dr. Merrill Matthews, again, a public policy analyst, and we have one of his articles from The Hill suggesting that maybe in the future we'll look at transgender surgery like lobotomies, and that certainly is going to be a piece that we will get to a little bit later. We also, of course, will be talking about the shutdown. We'll also talk about the peace process and some comments about that. Charles Cook, how not to be caught saying hideous things. Spoiler alert, don't say them in the first place. Probably a good idea there. And, of course, we will also spend some time talking about the issue of religious liberty, which is why we have Jeff Mateer, Executive Vice President, Chief Legal Officer for First Liberty Institute. Well, Jeff, help me out here. I posted this one, and there are many others, but I titled it, Oklahoma Church Allowed to Use Property, ready for this, for religious services. Tell us the story.
Yeah, just it's incredible. But, you know, I'd like to say that this was isolated, but it's not isolated.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing across the country where just local governments gone crazy, so to speak. And this is one of all places. It's Oklahoma, right? And you would think of anywhere you would have
Yes.
respect for people of faith.
Yes.
And Church of Christ, it's a Church of Christ. It would be Oklahoma. But in this little town, which I'm not even sure I can say it correctly, it's Sapulpa. Sapulpa. Do you know it, buddy? Okay. All right. So
good to have a
and
Texan here.
I don't know the folks there, but this is just outrageous.
I know both of them.
Oh, you know, yeah, whoever's there. Well, apparently the mayor, there are 9 people on their city council, including the mayor, and it took a 5-4 vote to allow this
and
church.
And then it was 5-4. You thought this is 9-0, and it's 5-4.
It's 5-4, and the mayor voting against it. And so there was a vacant piece of property.
Yes.
The church is growing and needed a new property, and so the church, locates this property and thinks it's the right place to go. And actually, the city employees approved of the church going there, and the mayor and some others objected because it's something we hear from time to time as well. That's not in the plan for the city. We actually want something that pays taxes there. And so they deny it, and fortunately, the church did reach out to us, and we corrected the city's understanding of what the law is with regard to denying churches the right to occupy space. But to me, what's kind of interesting about this is, well, it was a vacant piece of property, but what was it before the church? And so you're thinking, well, it's got to have been something really important and good. Well, the property was used as a marijuana dispensary. And so you've got a church replacing a marijuana dispensary. And apparently, at least some of the leaders in this city in Oklahoma think it would be better to have a marijuana dispensary than a church, that's more valuable. The other is, and our friend Jeremy Dice is what was one of the lead lawyers on this case.
Oh, but he had fun with that.
He was telling me, not only just that it also, the other part of the building, because it was two parts, marijuana dispensary. The other part of the building was an event center. Uh-huh. And so where they would host bingo and cornhole tournaments. And so you got the marijuana and the bingo and I can't make this up, right? I mean, it's just too good.
I know.
But they would rather have that than a church. Uh-huh. And so, fortunately, 5-4, the church can now exist.
But again, Dr. Matthews, just for a second, buddy, I mean, we're just talking about 5-4. I mean, this should have been 9-0. And again, this is in a very small community there in Oklahoma. But as boy, basically Jeff Mateer points out so often, it just seems like every time we turn around, there's another case where they have to either file a demand letter or in some cases actually go to court to try to deal with this.
And had this been in Muskogee, it wouldn't have been a problem because we know from the song they don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee.
That's
great line
That's
of
a
the
good
day.
one. That's a good one.
That's the best line of the day right off the bat. We're not going to improve on that, so that was very good. But nevertheless, just real quickly before we take a break, I always like to start out with some religious liberty issues and then at the very end have some prayer requests. And one of those, of course, is you have some cases before the Supreme Court. So as much as we're laughing about this one was easily resolved. Some of the cases you have before the courts in the past, and even one this time, are really to deal with a precedent that could be overturned, which would be something that would be even better for religious liberty.
No, I mean, and that's usually if not every time, when the Supreme Court takes a case, I mean, that's not just going to apply to the parties in front of it.
True.
And so when you have a Coach Kennedy case, for instance, yes, the case was about Coach Kennedy. Could he pray at the 50-yard line after a football game? And that's great. The court says, yes, coach can do that. But the case means so much more. It means other coaches, other teachers, and of course we know in the Coach Kennedy case, because it completely had us go back to the original understanding of the Establishment Clause, it affects every Establishment Clause case in the country. So that's what those Supreme Court cases do. And right now we've got one that the court is going to hear. We're anxiously waiting to hear when it's going to hear it. Right. We keep waiting every week thinking we're going to go. We're thinking the December setting, but now it's now the October 5th, after October 15th, October 17th, and so we're waiting to hear when that case is going to be argued. And that's the case of Gabe Olivier, who's an evangelist who simply wanted to share his thoughts and the gospel outside an amphitheater, and the city there in Brandon, Mississippi said, well, no, you can go to this other part of the park way away from all the people and you can share. And the principle in that case is whether Gabe actually has a day in court. I mean, can he have his day in court? So a really important case. And then we have two others that the court is right now considering whether they're going to take. Case that I think we've talked about many times on the show, involving a Christian school in Florida playing against another Christian school, and the state telling them you can't pray before your game because it's in a state facility, the Citrus Bowl. Crazy case. And the final one is representing a group of Amish in the state of New York who are being told by the state that you have to have your kids vaccinated before they can go to the little one-room schoolhouse. So important cases, and those cases won't just impact the Amish in New York. They'll impact anybody who wants to educate their children. The Cambridge case, any Christian school in the country. So very, very important cases.
So again, if you go to the first article, which I'll take you to First Liberty, or you can just go to firstliberty.org. You can see that one there on the Oklahoma City. You can see, of course, the Gabe Olivier case, which is already there. And you can be praying about, of course, the Cambridge case, which again just cracks me up. Merrill Matthews, that this is the Citrus Bowl where Billy Graham had an evangelistic crusade. We have two Christian schools, but because it's a secular microphone, you couldn't pray before a Christian, if you will, I guess, final in terms of the football team. But anyway, we're going to take a break and get back to some very important issues. We still have a shutdown. We'll get some comments around the table right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Christians have always needed to know how to defend the Christian faith ever since Peter admonished us to always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. This is even more true with many people skeptical about God, Jesus, and the Bible. Doug Rotice and Andrew Shepherdson are the co-authors of an introduction into classical apologetics with the title, The Knowledge of God in the World and the Word. The primary focus is to put forth various arguments for the existence of God, and then finish with a defense of the Bible and a presentation of the truth about Jesus and his resurrection. Here is a summary of just 3 of the chapters in their book. The cosmological argument recognizes the relationship between cause and effect. This then points to a first cause of the cosmos that is transcendent to the cosmos. This argument is even more powerful now that scientists believe the universe had a beginning. The moral argument derives from the realization that there must be objective morality. If God did not exist, then objective moral values and duties would not exist, but they do exist and point to God's existence. The design argument claims that God's fingerprints can be found all over creation. William Paley proposed this argument, but scientists in the 19th and early 20th century dismissed it. However, we now see what has been called the return of the God hypothesis because of the discovery of the fine-tuning of the universe. In my interview with the 2 authors, I mentioned that more and more scientific evidence has accumulated to bolster some of these arguments. No wonder some have described us as living in the golden age of apologetics. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with me today, Jeff Mateer, Merrill Matthews, and we will open up the phones to give you a chance to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. This shutdown just keeps going and going and going, and pretty soon we're going to have a 3-week shutdown, and maybe, unless something changes, could then set the record for the longest shutdown. So far, it's one of the longer ones. And in a few minutes, we'll talk about, again, the fact that we have a take action item, the Prevent Government Shutdowns Act of 2025. But first of all, this article by Jim Garrity is a reminder that sometimes there is this assumption that one party or the other will bear the primary responsibility. But I think it's fair, Dr. Matthews, for just a minute, that, okay, 58% of Americans said President Trump and the Republicans have a great deal or quite a bit of responsibility for the shutdown. 54% say the same about Democrats in Congress. Given the fact that it's an error margin of almost 4%, basically, Americans tend to blame whoever they dislike mostly for this. And even
which is both parties right now.
Yeah, which seems to be the case. But there is this idea that Chuck Schumer, who is, again, the Senate Minority Leader, he said countless number of times now that he thinks this is working for the Democrats. And I'm like, what poll is he looking at?
You know, I've seen polls, and my general sense is that Republicans are taking a slightly bigger hit, though not much. And the Republicans keep calling it the Schumer shutdown. But John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, keeps holding votes in the Senate, and you can't get the Democrats. You've got a couple of Democrats who are willing to vote for ending the debate, where you have to get the 60 votes so you can go to vote for it. And if they could get the votes to end the debate, then Republicans, you would just need a majority. But they can't seem to get that. I've heard that some Democrats are thinking about trying to primary Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania, because they feel like he's been voting with Republicans on this. I don't know that anybody wins in this, but there are some people who are seriously facing some significant problems because of checks not coming in and so forth.
We'll talk about that.
Having said that, the country's still kind of moving along. Flights may be delayed a little bit, but the country's still kind of moving. And so we'd like to be able to have the government work. But we can't seem to get it done right now. And from Republican standpoint, they've held pretty firm because they don't want to have the enhanced subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. And that's where Democrats are saying, we want the enhanced subsidies to the Affordable Care Act that we passed during the pandemic. We want them to stay. Republicans are saying those were enhanced. Those were never part of the original legislation. We want to go back to normal. And Democrats don't want to do that. They also don't want the cuts in Medicaid. And Republicans are talking, some Republicans in the background are saying, all right, maybe we give them an extension of a year on the enhanced subsidies while we work out something. But that would take you up to the real midterms. We've got elections coming up on November 4th, but you've got midterms next year. And the last thing you want to do is have people lose, if you're in the party in power, lose a bunch of subsidies right before the election. So if they're not going to do it now, I would not suggest they extend it for 1 year, because then there would be even more pressure.
Well, I mean, the way I look at it, the Democrats are attempting to hold the country hostage. And I get the Republicans are losing some of the PR battle, which isn't too surprising, considering
that's typical.
Because the
there's
mass
probably a lot
media.
of Democrats in this group that said they hold Trump responsible, but otherwise,
right.
yeah.
Well, but at the end of the day, what the Democrats can't get through the normal process, I mean, they can't get an extension. I mean, if you do a straight up vote, if they went and had a straight up vote, the extensions fail. Because the Republicans have a majority and they could go run on that. So what the Democrats are doing is they couldn't get it otherwise. So they're going to hold up the whole government. They should be the ones getting blamed. I think, in some respects, the idea that we're not going to pay the federal workers for the time off. Some of the things that Russ is a vote is
OMB.
OMB.
Yes,
is proposing. I think is very interesting, because that's the the things that we're hearing. I had a briefing yesterday from some people on the Hill that I got to attend. And they were saying they think that this could come to an end next week, that it won't come to an end. They were saying will not come to an end today, because the Democrats want to have their rallies tomorrow, because they're apparently going to be huge rallies across the country. These no king rallies across the country.
Including in Austin.
and they want to have, that's going to be a big thing. Everybody can go and beat their chest or whatever they do, and
beat their pots and pans, in the frog suits. If you've seen those, okay.
And I always think, no kings, but Jesus, right? But I don't think that's what they mean.
No, I don't think so.
I'm not sure.
I'm
not. So we're probably not going to happen. But it will be October 31st is second paycheck.
Yeah.
So we missed one paycheck so far. So the second paycheck, and I flew this week, and I saw nothing at the airports. Now maybe, and it was it's October, and so it was for a lot of people Columbus Day. I flew on Columbus Day
and fall break.
Fall break for a lot of people, and I didn't notice anything. The TSA people were there doing what TSA does.
Yeah.
Didn't seem to be too enthused either way. I actually did. It did cross my mind. I did think, should I ask one of them, are you working without pay? But then I thought, I really don't want to create any. I mean, you just want to get through TSA, the check, right?
We need a full body part.
Right. All right.
We need a pat down here.
Wise guy here.
Mateer.
Wise guy. Yeah.
So one of the compromises they could, and John Thune, head of the Senate, has said that he has offered to Schumer the opportunity for them to vote on the extension of the subsidies after the bill passes.
Right.
It probably would not pass the Senate, probably wouldn't pass the House. But Schumer said he hasn't gotten any contact like that, so you don't know who's telling the truth on this. But something like that might end up being. This is oftentimes where you have the compromise. We're going to let you have a vote on something after we get what we want, and we both know that it's not going to pass, but it allows you to say you had the vote.
Yes, and that's certainly the case. One other question I had, and we've been talking about this with the shutdowns, and we'll talk about the action item. You have the non-essentials and the essentials, and there's no rhyme to reason. The other day when I wrote the column, it was true that at that time, none of the workers at the Smithsonian Institution were sent home, although now they have been because they ran out of money. Almost all the workers at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission were furloughed. The U.S. Capitol Visitor Center was closed, but a lot of the national parks were at least partially open. So it's even hard to figure out who's essential and who's non-essential. And that is given an occasion for somebody you just mentioned a minute ago, Jeff, and that is Russ Vaught, who's been on the program with us before, with Office of Management and Budget, to do an RIF, which says a reduction in force. And they're saying, if you're a non-essential worker at home, we're just going to encourage you can stay there permanently.
Yeah, I mean, that's, to me, if there's anything, if there's a silver lining in this is, and it's with any government shut, we actually found out who the essential, and it's a broad definition of essential, but let's figure out, if you're not essential, we don't need you. You don't need to come back.
But here's the problem: there are a number of people back in the spring took the furlough, which said if you step out, we'll pay you through September, I think it was, and then you'll be without a job. They now apparently are asking for some of them to come back, which was always a bit of the problem here. I'm all for shutting down, laying off a lot of government workers. The question is, who should we be laying off? Which ones? And that's always been the question, because you want productive, committed workers there, but you don't want, in government and bureaucracy, you get a lot of people who are just sort of writing and taking a check. So you'd like to get those out.
Well, if nothing else, Jeff reminds me of Elon Musk, because remember when he took over Twitter, he fired 80%, recognized that there were going to be some things that would break, and so then he brought back the people that he needed to bring back. That happened with Social Security. I talked about just the other day in 1996, where they laid off so many that eventually they brought some back. Mm-hmm. But then you could pick and choose who you wanted to have there. Right. So if you are convinced, as we are, that maybe this whole idea of political games is ridiculous, then I would encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net. We have in the middle section there, contact Congress about the Prevent Government Shutdowns Act of 2025. This is just one of many pieces of legislation, but we featured this one this week because it's in the House by a Representative Jody Arrington, who is from the state of Texas, and in the Senate, James Lankford, who is a senator from Oklahoma, both of whom have been on the program. And if you would like to send a message to your 2 senators and your 1 representative, we've made it very easy. We give you some information about it. We give you some quotes from the 2 individuals, Jody Arrington as well as James Lankford. I have a suggested letter which you can modify. Click the button that says send, and there you are. If you want to be old-fashioned, you can click the button that says print and mail, print it out, and then put it in the mail if you would like to do so. So we just wanted to give you that opportunity, and we could talk all day about the shutdown, but I haven't had these 2 individuals talking about whether or not we're going to have peace in the Middle East. So we'll talk about that right after this.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer, and that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us today, Jeff Mateer, Merrill Matthews, and the next article that we have, it's by Ben Shapiro. And, of course, we've been talking a little bit this week about the peace process and the decision to actually engage a number of other nations, oftentimes referred to as Muslim nations that aren't trying to kill us, that have agreed, some of which were part of the Abraham Accords. And I thought this piece by Ben Shapiro was good enough because, after all, he's Jewish. Number two, he was actually at the Knesset to hear the president give, how do we say this nicely, a wide-ranging speech all over the map on those issues. But first, just a few minutes. Jeff, what about this? I mean, I think we're all recognized enough that we can't trust Hamas, but at the same time, we'll give credit where credit is due, whether it's former President Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, or a variety of others have actually said, well, good job, President. You deserve some congratulations, even though there's been a strange silence from a lot of the other leaders in the Democratic Party. But this is something that most people thought would never actually be able to take place.
No, I mean, it's an amazing first step to what is the most volatile historically area in the world, right? And so I think President Trump needs very, very much. It doesn't happen without him. It really doesn't. We know it doesn't because when Joe Biden was president, it didn't happen. And I think it's certainly it's an unconventional, unorthodox style.
Yes.
But for this time in history, it's working. Now, let's not oversell it. And,
that's right.
And
Be careful.
And
Yeah.
because it is, to say it's fragile is probably an understatement in peace because of who you're dealing with. But of course, the Israelis, and I think this article and Ben Shapiro's article makes a good point. I mean, the Israelis paved the way for this. I mean, you crush your opponent,
Right.
then the opponent is looking for a way to resolve this. I do think, some of the media came out and where Hamas is just, they're saying what a great deal they got. And I'm thinking, well, after you got completely crushed and that you still can do a deal versus just completely being wiped out. So on foreign policy, I wouldn't put anything past Donald Trump. And I guess, now today we're sitting, he's on to Ukraine.
There you go.
Let's solve Ukraine.
He's 8-0, so he just keeps going after those 8.
And it's going to be funny. Funny. It's going to be interesting next year when the Nobel Peace Prizes are handed out.
I was going to bring that up.
Donald Trump has to get it.
Yes, if
right?
they don't.
I mean, if this stays in place, and we're here in October of 2026, and this stays in place, and then think, if there's something worked out in Ukraine, how do they not give Donald Trump the Nobel Peace Prize?
After what they gave to Barack Obama.
Now, he's going to want more money than $1 million. $1 million? I should get $100 million for this now.
So to me, the person that deserves the most credit is Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, let's talk about that.
He's been there the whole 2 years, and he has never wavered on this, given all the pressure from international leaders, International Criminal Court, everything else, accusing him of being a genocide, a human rights abuser, and so forth. He's the one person who sort of kept. So having said that, then you have to give, I think, Donald Trump the second place credit because, as Jeff said, this almost certainly would not have happened without Donald Trump sort of stepping in there and pressuring it. But it was Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu that largely wiped out Hamas and took out Iran, gave them a hard time. We came in and helped out, but they did it. And then Hezbollah. If you kept Iran and Hezbollah powerful, then Hamas would have been able to stay in, I suspect. But you've sort of undermined their ability to get money and arms and so forth from another place. So I think the real challenge here is the peace afterwards. If you're able to maintain that, and I'm not optimistic just because I don't think Hamas gives up on anything until you take their lives. I think that's just what they've shown us.
Sadly.
So I think peace, I would put peace with an asterisk there, because maybe we have that. Maybe, in fact, we've already heard this week, Hamas is going and taking family leaders and so forth and executing there in public. So I'm not sure this ever is resolved until there is an international peace force, maybe made up of Arabic countries, that are in there keeping Hamas toned down.
Well, what you were talking about is if you take a piece of paper and you have on the left-hand side October 6th, 2023, and now October 6th, the day before, you had a relatively strong Hamas that controlled Gaza. You had a Hezbollah that was threatening in many ways. You had the Houthis, and all that funded by a very strong Iran.
Right.
What you have now are people, that Hezbollah leaders that don't want to get pagers anymore. You've got not many Hamas leaders that you can find, because we even killed some of them that weren't in Gaza.
Right.
And, of course, you just mentioned all the attacks there in the Iran nuclear facility, including the bunker busters. And all of a sudden, you have a much more degraded world. And so as a result, I think that's exactly what was taking place.
And, with Germany, we initially targeted in our bombing in World War II industrial areas, munitions, and so forth. But eventually they said, we're just going to start bombing Berlin and other places. It's going to kill civilians. We don't want to do that, but we've got to get them to the point where they will say, we give up. And I think Netanyahu was hoping to do, and we did the same thing in Japan. I think Netanyahu was hoping to get to that point with Hamas. I don't think he's actually gotten quite there. But it may be that once you get some law and order in Gaza, that you may have the people in the Palestinians who are tired of Hamas rule and tyranny actually getting them taken out.
Yeah, so we'll see. But again, it's just one of those question marks. But I'm coming back to Jeff. How do you even avoid giving the Peace Prize this year? But again, the recipient is an individual fighting for democracy in Venezuela. But even she said, this one probably is Donald Trump's. But it's got to be next year for sure. I don't think he could come up with any other conclusion.
Even more surprising than Trump would be Netanyahu receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. But having said that, I don't disagree with Dr. Matthews about Netanyahu. It doesn't happen without him either, and how he stayed committed. But yeah, the committee. They're going to have, or they have no legitimacy, and I don't know. Maybe they don't anymore. But the things that Donald Trump is doing, no other president has done. His style is so unorthodox, so unconventional, and we're going to see it in. We're seeing it today. Today's meeting with Zelensky apparently had I think he said a good phone call with Putin. Yeah.
Who knows?
My brother-in-law and sister-in-law just moved to Budapest. I guess they're going to be, because that's where it's going to be, where they're going to have the big summit apparently. So exciting times, no doubt. And at the end of the day, yes, Trump is going to have to receive it, but. Dr. Matthews is right. It's got to be. It's a very. If this makes it, it's going to have to be a commitment from a group of forces that are pulled together. Of course, we were joking last week when Trump basically announced a deal before there was a deal. He said there was a deal, and which sort of forced them to have a deal. And then, of course, Tony Blair is going to be whatever the czar.
Maybe, yeah.
Is going to be the czar. And what I wondered was, does Tony Blair even know he was I mean, did they even ask Tony Blair whether he wanted that job? Because Trump could have just said it, which is the brilliance of Donald Trump. You know, he just says it, and then people have to do it.
So I'm at least going to be a little skeptical that the Nobel Prize goes to Donald Trump next year, in part because I don't know that the committee wants to listen to a wide-ranging speech.
Well, there are with that. There is that too. You know, and the other thing that we'll talk about after the break is if indeed Benjamin Netanyahu wants to come and speak to the United Nations, what looks like the next mayor of New York City says that they would arrest him because he is guilty of genocide. So that is a good lead into another piece we'll be talking about because we're in the campaign season. We had a debate the other night between the three mayor candidates and also between the two attorney generals running for the state of Virginia. And of course, there was one earlier than that with the two governor candidates. So we're in the political season, but at least the future mayor of New York City, many people think, actually said he would arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he got off the plane there in New York City. It's just a different world. We'll talk about that right after this.
The New York Times recently published an opinion piece about America's boy crisis. It's by social scientist Richard Reeves and Harvard political scientist and author of Bowling Alone, Robert Putnam. Here's their summary of the problem. Since 2010, suicide rates among young men have risen by a third. They are now higher than they are among middle-aged men. The share of college degrees going to men has fallen to 41%, lower than the women's share in 1970. 1 in 10 men aged 20 to 24 is effectively doing nothing, neither enrolled in school nor working. That's twice the rate in 1990. These issues merit more attention than they receive. Dr. Reeves and Professor Putnam say leaders sometimes fail to act for fear of being seen as somehow anti-woman. Now, they warn, alarm bells are ringing. Dr. Reeves delves into young men's social struggles in his book Of Boys and Men, and now in this op-ed, reporting that they're less involved in civic organizations and even family life than their elders were. A recent Gallup poll asked young men aged 15 to 34 if they had experienced loneliness a lot on the previous day. 25% said they had. 1 in 7 said they have no close friends. 3% said this in 1990. Detached, socially isolated young men can become susceptible to reactionary voices online. Dr. Reeves and Professor Putnam warn that they're vulnerable to totalitarian ideology and appeals to violence. The authors point us back to what in the 1900s was called the boy problem. The solution was to build male-centered organizations to equip boys to become good men. Today, civic organizations are struggling. Organizations founded strictly for boys are now co-ed or no longer exist. Most YMCA members are female. Boy Scouts is now Scouting America. Thankfully, many young men are turning to churches. Perhaps their leaders can find wisdom in what worked 100 years ago. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again as we are going to spend just a little bit of time talking about some of these campaigns. Some of this may go into the next hour as well because we've got a very good piece on how not to be caught saying hideous things from Charles Cook. But let's, if I can, maybe just go back to something that's a little easier, and that is last night you had 3 candidates for New York mayor. And two of those individuals in the past have actually said they wanted to defund the police, but they didn't seem to remember that. And it reminded me, if you ever watch Men in Black, they got these neuralizers, goes, you know, and somehow they seem to forget that.
Or the flashy thing, as they call it.
The little flashy thing, yeah. But that's, I think, the issue is that sometimes they can forget, but we do have video. And this piece that we'll talk about in just a minute gets us into this. But Dr. Matthews, for just a minute, I mean, I don't know that many people would have predicted, even in the wokeness that we were dealing with in the last couple of years, that we would have the next mayor of New York City a Muslim Marxist. And if I told you that a year ago, you would have said, I think we need to institutionalize Kerby, because there's just no chance. And that's exactly what we're heading towards.
And it looks like that's the person who will end. Now, my understanding is that Cuomo is doing a little better, is catching up some, but he's still got a ways to go. And it's interesting that you just... you've got some. I wouldn't vote for Andrew Cuomo for virtually anything. On the other hand, I find myself rooting for Andrew Cuomo because it's the least bad option for New York City. You remember one time when you had David Duke running for, wasn't it governor? Was it governor or mayor of New Orleans? It was running against one of the former guys former governors, I think, who'd been in jail for some time, and the campaign slogan was "Vote for the criminal. It's important." And you sort of think that's where you are right now.
Yeah. Vote for the harasser. It's important, right? That's
Edwin Edwards is who that was.
Edwin Edwards, I do remember that. Okay, let's just broaden it a little bit, because we can talk about what's going on in New York. Let's go to Virginia for just a minute, and you have this candidate for Attorney General, Jay Jones, who has said some pretty awful things, but I'll just pick one that is illustrative, and that is saying that the Virginia Republican House Speaker Todd Gilbert should get 2 bullets in the head. You know, it's the old, like, if I have a gun with 2 bullets and I've got, Adolf Hitler and Pol Pot, I'd use both of them on the Republican House Speaker, also hoping his kids would be killed and all of that. And then this piece by Charles Cook, I did not know about this, but Maine's next senator has a record of declaring himself to be a communist, which actually isn't necessarily a negative in some places, apparently, describing white rural America as racist and stupid, calling cops names I won't call them. And so then, of course, this week, as you might have predicted, Politico just looked and looked and looked and looked, and they found some young Republicans that said some pretty despicable things as well. And so you've had, of course, the governor candidate who's a Republican, that Winsome Sears saying, well, I have no problem of asking them to step down, but I also think that Jay Jones should step down. So this has become kind of interesting. And Charles Cook reminds us, Jeff, that if you don't want to be caught saying hideous things, well, don't say them in the first place.
Seems to be common sense, but it's who these people are, right? I mean, if in the case of the Senate candidate in Maine, I mean, he actually believes those things.
Yes.
I mean, he didn't. I mean, he's not saying them on the campaign trail. He said those in some cases years, months before. That's actually who he is. Same thing with Jay Jones in Virginia. I mean, this is the type of person that the Democrats have nominated to be their attorney general. It's someone. I mean, it's obviously things he's thought about, because he's actually said them. And yeah, they're idiotic, and in some ways they're good. And in the case of the AG's race, it has changed the race. I mean, he was leading Mieres, and Jason Mieres is a good friend of First Liberty. He's a great, outstanding attorney general.
Right.
Has a great story in his background, and just a strong leader. And he was behind in the polls, and people were bracing. And don't forget, Virginia is strange. They're one of the few states they elect their state leaders on an off year. So the elections are just a few weeks away now. I guess 3 weeks away, and so this was and so to speak, it's an October surprise, but it's sort of like a self-inflicted October surprise. But it has flipped the race. And in the governor's race, the Democrat is still leading, but the Democrat is sort of distancing a little bit
from Jay Jones.
Not a lot, but a little bit from Jay Jones, but still leading against Winsome Sears. Although that race has tightened, but Mieres, it's flipped, and that is good news. It's good news for the country, and hopefully Winsome Sears, who again another outstanding candidate. Hopefully that will change as well. But it's hard. I mean, Virginia has a history of when there's a Republican president in the middle of their term, that then Virginia seems to go Democrat and vice versa. And so when Biden was in, then of course Youngkin came in and won. So again, it just reveals who they are. And these young Republicans saying these things, I mean, I almost don't believe it. It's just so outrageous. Yep. And we're around a lot of young people in what we do at First Liberty. I don't hear these things from them. I mean, these people they should be kicked out of their positions of authority. That's unacceptable. But my only response is they're young people.
And you'll never hear from them again.
Yeah, and Jay Jones is not a young person saying these things. This guy in Maine saying these outrageous things, and as we just talked about, the person who's probably going to be the mayor of New York could be worse than all these people.
Yeah, for a long time they've had opposition research. So candidates go and look into the background of other candidates, and they dig through all kinds of things. They come up with pictures you could be a candidate in your 50s and they find a picture of you in college wearing blackface or something of that nature.
Well, we know that.
And all of a sudden this is something that you did years ago. But social media has exacerbated this now. And for some reason, people think they can go on social media and say things and it doesn't affect anybody. It doesn't get out. But increasingly, if you're saying something, you need to be aware that it might appear in the newspaper tomorrow. Even if you're just sort of the average person out there, it might appear at some point, especially if you end up getting nominated or a position or run for office.
Again, I think we can talk about this a little bit later, but there seems to be in the press a little bit of backing away from Zoran Mamdani. Mm-hmm. The other day, the Washington Post says, we all know what will happen if indeed he has free buses. Then all of a sudden, nobody will have to pay, $2.90 bus fare, and the buses will be filled with homeless people, and that'll be their new homes. And
there won't
when
be the
the
subways
Washington
anymore?
Post is saying that, you begin to say, okay, maybe we recognize that this guy, even though we've been talking about him and we haven't been that critical of him, we recognize that as soon as he gets into office, he's going to do some things that are going to be outrageous. And then if you think it's hard to run as a Democrat right now, just think what it's like. We have, Jack Chiaratorelli? I always have trouble with his name there. Might win in New Jersey, a Republican in New Jersey. Of course, they did have Chris Christie.
Yeah, did have Chris Christie.
But you're just starting to see some, if you will, purple or blue states, which might go Republican. What happens when Zoran Mamdani is the, if you will, the leader of the Democratic Party?
Yeah.
Again, mayor of the largest state in America, the center of the financial world. So anyway, you've got a whole lot more to talk about, including a very good piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews. Let's take a break, though, and when we come back, we'll get into our second hour worth of great material. All that coming up right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give at 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time getting into a variety of different issues. Coming up a little bit later, we'll talk about some of the press restrictions being dropped there at the Pentagon in terms of classified information, which would also lead to the fact that we have an indictment of John Bolton. So we'll get to that soon enough. But certainly, and I might just mention before we're done, we have Penedexter's commentary on the America's boy crisis. But I thought we would stay on this issue of transgender for just a few minutes for a couple reasons. Dr. Merrill Matthews has written a very good piece in The Hill, Transgender Surgery on Minors, the New Lobotomy. We'll get into what that means. Also have one about NVIDIA, which is, of course, the chips that are produced to give us a lot of artificial intelligence, but they have now seemingly wanted to make the same mistake that Bud Light did with Dylan Mulvaney, who was a transgender influencer. So we'll get into all of that. But Dr. Matthews, first of all, when we look at the history of a lobotomy, I think of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You even give us some quotes here from everything from Medical News Today to the Wall Street Journal. It's good for people to recognize there was a time in which lobotomies were actually seen as the most progressive medical surgery.
Absolutely. As remember back in the 30s, euthanasia was a big deal.
Yes.
And also castration. I mean, it was for people who had mental health issues. So there was a number of things going on back then. But lobotomies apparently emerged in Europe in the late 1800s, but they didn't really take off here until the mid-1930s or so as a doctor. And to be fair, they didn't have medications for people with mental illness. And so you had what we called insane asylums in, and you had people in there who were struggling with all kinds of mental health problems. And they were not great places to be. And so you had a man who stepped up, a doctor, and said, started operating. And lobotomy, they go into the front of the brain and they would cut some things and take out part of the brain there. And it was meant to try to take away some of the reactions, to tone people down, make them a little more docile and so forth, and less aggressive. And they had some success with that, but they also had a lot of problems with that. And what happened is the lobotomies really picked up late 30s through the 40s, early 50s. Then we started introducing medications, but lobotomies were already getting a bad reputation then, because there were so many after effects, so many side effects from people who got these. Many times they were just never the same person. And so the medical community was moving away from that. Many doctors opposed it all along. And now we look back on this as what Britannica calls a horror story, as what they were doing then. And many of these patients weren't able to give consent because they were mental illness and so forth. And so looking at that, I thought, we're into a position right now where we've seen over the past several years these transgender surgeries on minors. I make a point in there. I'm not talking about adults. Adults have the ability to make this and make a decision, and they live with the consequences. But you have minors who at the age of 10, 11, 12 begin to think, especially through social media, maybe I really should have been born the opposite gender of what I am, the opposite sex. They go through a process. There are clinics and doctors out there who are, I would argue, based upon some of the things I've read, who are actually promote that, encourage that, if not, at least don't resist it. Don't provide them with mental health the mental health care that they need, and tell the parents that the kids are liable to commit suicide if they don't, if they aren't able to do this transgender surgery. So a lot of those transgender surgeries have gone on. We now have people who are now adults who did this when as minors, and they said, I should have never done that. I didn't know what was happening. I was going through a phase. I am now on serious medications that I'll never be able to get off of. I'm sterile. I will never be able to have children. I've had a sex change operation. I can't find anybody either in my sex or the opposite sex who wants to go along, who want to be part of my life. So we've got lawsuits, and we've talked with Jordan Campbell, who's running a law firm here that's prosecuting these lawsuits or moving forward with these lawsuits. So I think at some point we're going to look back on this and say, what in the world were we thinking on minors that we were encouraging them to go through these, what they call top surgeries, removing breast, doing major surgery on genitals and so forth for minors?
Well, again, you talk about the fact that there were more than 50,000 lobotomies, which now is, again, a very sad chapter in American medical history. We've done at least 13,000, almost 14,000 gender reassignment procedures. And one of our action items, which is the one we had just before the one I just mentioned, was the Chloe Cole Act, which has been introduced by Republicans, which would ban chemical and surgical transitions for anyone under the age of 18 with certain exceptions. And it's named for this young woman, Chloe Cole. Always kind of a tongue twister there, but at the age of 15, she was a perfectly healthy teenager, biologically. But she was convinced, and her parents were convinced, and maybe even brought some pressure. They said that they were pressured to actually have her have a double mastectomy. And as a result, that was gender-affirming care. But then she, almost a year later, regretted her transition, and of course is one of those people engaged in what's called detransitioning, which when you come out as a detransitioner, you think that people didn't like Charlie Kirk. Boy, if you are, man, they come, the trans activists come after you in significant ways. So I just might mention, even though today we're talking about the action item on government shutdowns, if you didn't have a chance to react to that one, it's the Chloe Cole Act as well, and there's a good illustration of that.
Yes, and with this transgender surgery, there's no going back. Unlike, say, if you get a tattoo and you say, I don't like this anymore, so you can have that removed. There's no going back. Even if you were to come up and have cosmetic surgery to put some breast on you or something that you had taken off, it's never the same, and you're always on strong medications for the rest of your life.
I rarely say we can learn from Europe.
Yes.
Because
there you go.
But on this one, we can learn from you. I mean, the European, what many on the left would say the most, progressive nations in the world are stepping back. They've already dealt with this issue, and they're stepping, certainly with minors, but even for adults, they're even cutting back on what's available. Because I think your comparison, what you've done, Dr. Matthews, is a great example, because I think you said it. Yeah, it's an unfortunate chapter of medical history. I think we will look back on this period and say, I cannot believe we were allowing certainly children, but I would even go, and I get adults have the ability, and it's more palatable that an adult chooses. Right. But even then, I think we're going to look back on this, whether it's child or adult, that this was just something that we should not have been doing, and obviously for a lot of reasons. And in Europe, they're not talking about from a biblical concept, of course. They're just saying this is bad psychology, and it's really hurting people. And so we can't. And this is the one case where we can actually learn from Europe.
As we come into break, let me just mention that Dr. Paul McHugh was at Johns Hopkins University, and he used to recommend those. And then when he came out against this, then the whole trans group came after him as well. But I think we're learning some more. And I think Dr. Matthews has a few other things to say, but we're up against a break. But if you would like to read this is, of course, one of many articles that you can find out about that Dr. Merrill Matthews has written in The Hill, but this one's called Transgender Surgery on Minors, the New Lobotomy. That'll link into another one we're going to talk about in just a minute in terms of whether or not you want to promote transgenderism on your corporate website. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Christians have always needed to know how to defend the Christian faith ever since Peter admonished us to always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. This is even more true with many people skeptical about God, Jesus, and the Bible. Doug Rotice and Andrew Shepardson are the co-authors of an introduction into classical apologetics with the title, The Knowledge of God in the World and the Word. The primary focus is to put forth various arguments for the existence of God, and then finish with a defense of the Bible and a presentation of the truth about Jesus and his resurrection. Here is a summary of just 3 of the chapters in their book. The cosmological argument recognizes the relationship between cause and effect. This then points to a first cause of the cosmos that is transcendent to the cosmos. This argument is even more powerful now that scientists believe the universe had a beginning. The moral argument derives from the realization that there must be objective morality. If God did not exist, then objective moral values and duties would not exist, but they do exist and point to God's existence. The design argument claims that God's fingerprints can be found all over creation. William Paley proposed this argument, but scientists in the 19th and early 20th century dismissed it. However, we now see what has been called the return of the God hypothesis because of the discovery of the fine-tuning of the universe. In my interview with the 2 authors, I mentioned that more and more scientific evidence has accumulated to bolster some of these arguments. No wonder some have described us as living in the golden age of apologetics. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we certainly have Jeff Mateer and Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio, but we'd also welcome your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. I noticed that we, in the past, have actually posted one of our booklets on transgenderism. That's where you get some of the material from Dr. Paul McHugh, again, a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Johns Hopkins Medical School, yet nevertheless came to the conclusion that this is just not working. We've had on this program Abigail Schreier, and her book is called Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze, Seducing Our Daughters, and talking about the work by Lisa Littman, who was a secular feminist, so you can't say that she was a Christian. And we've also had Dr. Ryan Anderson, When Harry Became Sally, responding to the transgender moment. And, of course, you can find those books, although for a while they had banned the book about the irreversible damage from, of all places, Target. But I think things are changing, and that's good because, as you point out, what we certainly have now as an attitude against lobotomies, given the individuals that you've interviewed, Dr. Matthews, who are actually bringing about some of these lawsuits, I think we're going to have that same kind of perspective eventually about transgender surgeries.
I think so, and if they are successful in those lawsuits and the doctors and clinics that perform them end up having to pay millions of dollars in damages, then you may see the medical community begin to step back, because the AMA and others have generally been supportive of the transgender movement. So if they begin to step back, then it sort of opens the door for people to be able to re-look at this. And Jeff mentioned the Europe. I believe I linked to the CAS report. It's called the CAS report in the piece.
Yeah.
So you can go look at that, the CAS report, and that includes several nations. I think it was the UK. CAS was the UK person, I believe, if I remember right.
That's correct.
Sort of leading that, and just their concerns that were raised. And one of the concerns that you see is there may have been people all along who said, as a youngster, maybe I belong to the other sex. I've got a friend who's a female, and she said I was a tomboy. I like to go and play and do things with boys when I was young, and then she got older and she was a perfect female. But one of the things that may happen is that we've seen happen is this explosion of mostly young girls through social media who are encouraging this. So that's one of the reasons why we think this isn't just something that's happening. It may be something that's being promoted just by the fact that we have access to social media now in ways that we did not 20 and 30 years ago.
And again, just to give a little bit more on that, turns out that Lisa Littman, it was in 2016, was at Brown University, and she began to notice something really odd, and that is Brown University's in Rhode Island, and she noticed all sorts of young teen girls in a very small town in Rhode Island all coming out as transgender. And she said, statistically, that makes no sense, because if you look in the literature, whenever we talked about any kind of gender dysphoria, it was always mostly boys, and it was a very small number. So it sure looked like her to be social contagion. She did searches, I should say, research, interviewed about 256 parents, found that the vast majority of these children had no indicators of childhood gender dysphoria. Some of them, actually 70% of the teenagers belonged to a peer group in which at least one friend had come out as transgender. The parents said that they basically found that the status that they have increased when they came out as transgender, looked like social contagion. I was speaking a while back at a men's retreat, and one of the individuals there was a professor at Brown, and he said, this is a woman that was completely destroyed, and yet they would say that she was, MAGA. She says, I'm a Democrat. I've never voted for a Republican in my life. She's a feminist, but just by coming and challenging whether or not transgender is social contagion was enough to have them kind of shut down her research, give her all sorts of difficulty. And I do believe that some of that might finally be changing. I hope.
And J.K. Rowling came out against girls and boys changing sexes to go in the opposite sport and so forth. So, yes, and she's always been a liberal. This is the writer of the Harry Potter series. But you do have some liberals out there who've raised some questions, and they've gotten beaten up, verbally at least, for doing so.
Well, let's, if we can, I think a good transition is to this piece, and that is, if you're not familiar with NVIDIA, and if you have money in the stock market, it has been one of the most successful stocks ever. And yet, interestingly enough, on its employee benefits page in NVIDIA, I think has maybe not learned a lesson from Bud Light. I know the audience of Point of View is not necessarily a Bud Light constituency, but you, I think, know the story of when Dylan Mulvaney, a transgender influencer, probably created the most costly marketing blunder in history. And if you go to NVIDIA, it says gender affirmation is a positive life event, something we celebrate at NVIDIA. We provide a variety of resources and benefits to help you and your family member transition. And so here you're talking about the fact that's not exactly a neutral stance. Matter of fact, it seems to me that, as we've seen in some of the surveys that are done, 6 out of every 10 consumers said they might even avoid a brand that takes a political stand on which they disagree. So whether it, Jeff, is Bud Light or whether it's NVIDIA, at a very time when many people are starting to say, I'm going to rethink this whole gender transition, I do not understand why some of these corporate companies and some of these major Fortune 500 companies think that it's going to be a real positive for their sales to actually come out in favor of gender transition surgeries.
Yeah, I don't know what this does to make a better product or to increase their profits, which seems to be the purpose of corporations, or should be the purpose of corporations, and why you would tout this. I mean, I mean, who are you trying to gain favor with? I mean, your employees, maybe a small segment of them. Certainly not your shareholders, not the public at large. I don't. It just seems like, did they not? Like, 4 years ago, maybe would have understood it a little bit, but after the Bud Light, it just makes no sense. Caught my attention because I think we've talked about, we've got a case. So we're representing a company in New Hampshire who's being sued because it doesn't provide this type of coverage for gender transition care.
Yeah.
In quotes.
Well, you also have Alaska Airlines, which ask for any kind of feedback on the LGBTQ, and as soon as a few flight attendants gave any kind of feedback, they fired them. So
right. I wonder
if
NVIDIA has some employees who've given some feedback. We may have some more cases resulting from that.
The bizarre thing on this is Target, of course, tried to reach out to the LGBTQ community, and you even if I disagree with it, you understand they're selling products directly to them. Well, no, I don't go out and buy a semiconductor chip for a major computer.
What does it benefit you?
I'm not. I don't go to the semiconductor chip store and pick any up. I never go to NVIDIA and order some for my home. It makes no sense for them to be involved in that because it has nothing to do with their clientele.
Right.
I mean, NVIDIA is the most valuable company in the world right now, but they make a very powerful chip that a lot of businesses and they want for computers and other things, but they're not selling to the individual market. So I'm mystified why they would do it.
Do they live in a bubble? I found a very good article coming out by Charles Murray, and of course he can be controversial, but he's got this latest one about mind brain, which we'll talk about next week. But Charles Murray years ago put together a study that then is a test, and you can go to public broadcasting to this day and take it and see how bubbly you are. And one of the things they found is the bubbliest zip codes were either like an upper east part of Manhattan, New York City, or Silicon Valley. Now, if you're in Silicon Valley and you want all the people that are there in Silicon Valley, or maybe some of them that happen to be up there in Seattle, Washington area, to approve of you, well, then making some statements about gender transition might be helpful. But like you said, it has nothing to do with your product, has nothing to do with your customers, but maybe just to get a pat on the back from some of your fellow bubbliest people that live in this world where they think everybody is really concerned about transitions that are taking place right now in the trans community.
And even if you're going to provide these services as part of your health insurance, why would you go and advertise it? I mean, it's one thing to provide the coverage.
You might get more, yeah.
But if you're going and advertising, that's where you raise the red flags among people who look at this and say, wait a minute, why are you doing this?
Yes. Well, we're going to take a break, but let me just mention, we'll come back after the half hour, and we do want to talk about some other issues, the Pentagon press restrictions and everything, but I always like to end with some of the prayer requests, and I think already Jeff has surfaced a few. We have a few airline attendants that were individuals at Alaska Airlines that expressed their opinion and were fired. You have another one up in the Northeast, so one's in the Northwest, one is in the Northeast, where they were getting into difficulty because they didn't provide some of this, and of course we talked about a few of these Supreme Court cases, so there are some very important cases that might resolve even more of this. But let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, and if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We did talk about the issue of transgenderism. We're going to move on in just a minute, but some of you might say, well, if I want to research this, maybe this is something you're dealing with in your community or something you're dealing with, maybe perhaps with your church, or maybe some individuals are talking about this. I did mention the book by Dr. Ryan Anderson, When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment, which I like because he has a theological perspective. He says some of this is Gnosticism, the fact that I'm in the wrong body. And if you've ever studied theology, you go, well, that's an interesting thought that I'd never had before. Of course, I mentioned Abigail Schreier, Irreversible Damage, and we've done interviews both with Ryan Anderson and with Abigail Schreier, the transgender craze seducing our daughters. And then also one I might mention, which I haven't mentioned yet, Andrew Walker, God and the Transgender Debate. What does the Bible actually say about gender identity? That is, again, an interview that we did here. So those are some books that are actually mentioned in our booklet. And, of course, you can find those in your local bookstore. One that didn't make it, because that booklet came out 2 years ago, is this book, which I'll hold up right here, which is called D-Trans, True Stories of Escaping the Gender Ideology Cult. And this was an interview that Penn and Dexter did with Mary Margaret Olahan. Mary Margaret Olahan is a good person on the detransition issue. A good person on the issue of men and women's sports would be Riley Gaines. So I just want you to know there's just a lot of great material out there, so that if you find yourself in a debate, a discussion, maybe there's somebody that at your corporation thinks we need to be funding gender transition, or maybe you want to challenge whether or not this is something that should be at your local hospital. Those are things that we want to make available to you. But let's, so if we can, move on to another one, because Dr. Matthews got a smile on my face with this one. The Pentagon decided to restrict the kinds of things that the press can publish without their approval. And the pushback, to put it mildly, has been significant, hasn't it?
Has been significant. And we weren't sure initially why, but basically you were going to have to sign a pledge that in order to have the Pentagon press room rights, that you were going to you're not going to publish anything that's not essentially approved by the Pentagon. And I looked at this and I thought, this is bizarre.
Yeah.
Because you won't look, every administration makes mistakes. Sometimes they make really big mistakes, and this is not only true of our government, other governments. And typically an administration, if they've made a big mistake, they don't want people to know about it, because they're going to have to then come out and explain why they made that mistake. And so you want an independent press where reporters, I would say honest, impartial reporters, are sniffing around looking for stories for things that the government's trying to cover up. And then if they get wind of it and somebody starts leaking information to them, that they cover that. And there have been times when I know the New York Times was getting ready to publish a story, and the administration, not necessarily Trump, but in years past, would contact them and say, they would give the administration a chance to respond quickly before they publish it. And the administration say, don't publish this, you're going to put something at risk. The Times might have said, well, we are going to publish it, but we'll give you 24 hours or something like that in order to, if you have some assets someplace you need to move or something of that nature. But you need to be able to have independent journalists looking out there, finding this kind of information, and sometimes they catch the government doing something it shouldn't be doing. You need that happening. If you're going through what the Pentagon wants you to do now, you'd have to be able to go to the Pentagon and say, here's my story. If they said, no, you can't do this, you can't publish it. So that is not what you want in a free country.
Well, and again, we can think of things like the Pentagon Papers. For some of our younger listeners, they go, I've never heard of that. Just go to Wikipedia. You can find out a little bit more about that. And it does seem to me that this is so restrictive that even Newsmax and even the Washington Times are saying this is a bridge too far. But Jeff, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I do agree, but I'll play just a little contrary. I mean, because that's what lawyers do, right? We want to be contrary.
That's right. We'll turn
if
this
I
into
were representing the Secretary of War, Secretary Hegseth,
yes.
But I say, look, we do not want to have leaks with regard to national security issues.
Right.
We do not. We do not. And so to establish reasonable, and I guess it's the devil's in the details of what's reasonable, to establish some reasonable procedures, reasonable policies that press need to abide by when covering national security issues. That seems acceptable. Now, they can go too far.
And always do.
Perhaps. But at the same time, should the New York Times publish the Pentagon Papers?
Yeah, that's a good question that was asked at the time.
Yeah, should the New York Times? The government has a legitimate interest if it's potentially saving lives, if it's revealing strategies, it's making us more vulnerable. Now, can that be abused? Absolutely, it can be abused. But, and again, I'm arguing something I probably don't feel as strongly for, because I think the fact that it's been, if you can't get Fox News, you can't get
That's what
Newsmax.
I was going to say. Pete Hegseth used to be at Fox News, and he can't get his fellows at Fox News to sign off on this. That tells you everything.
I think it does. I think it does, unfortunately. But I do think that there is, it can't be that there can't be some regulations, right?
Sure. Got that.
There can be.
That gets us to John Bolton in a minute, sure.
So what Pete Hegseth, and you sort of alluded to this, they're trying to stop the leaks within the Pentagon because Washington leaks like a sieve.
Oh, it does.
But including. Think of the source guy. Including some of the people at the top of those agencies.
That's right.
Washington leaks, and so they're trying to get control of the leaks, and every administration has trouble with this.
Yeah, it does.
Though, in my sense, the Biden administration had less trouble. You didn't even have people in the White House saying we think the guy is too over the hill. They were all on the same message there. So the Pentagon is trying to prohibit leaks, and the job of a journalist is to go and try to sniff out these things and to listen to leaks. And sometimes a leak is a whistleblower.
Yes.
And so that's what you're looking for, is that whistleblower who may be catching the government doing something it shouldn't be doing. But as I said, the pattern had been in the past that if a major media outlet was getting ready to release something, they'd go to the administration and say, here's what we're going to release, and the administration might try to stop them, persuade them not to do it. That usually didn't work, but they sometimes would give them a little bit of time or make a correction or two if they needed to in order to make sure there was accurate information.
Well, let's take the other part of that. I mentioned John Bolton. He was the national security advisor for Donald Trump. There's no love lost between the two of them. We already got that. But he has now been indicted because of the argument of mishandling classified information. Well, boy, that never happens, does it? And there's going to be a question as to whether or not he gets prosecuted the way either Hillary Clinton was not, or the way Bill Clinton, or the way, of course, Donald Trump was. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, apparently some of this classified information gets out because Mar-a-Lago had some.
Yes.
President Biden had some at his house, including by his Corvette in his garage. And then we found out that Mike Pence had some as well.
Mike Pence had some, and that was even worse, yeah. But again, this is the point, that back to what Jeff is saying, if you let too much information out, people will die. If there is covert information, or even if they understand the ways in which you collect that information, or the way in which you're going to actually go about that particular military action, that could be very dangerous. So I recognize some limits. But on the other hand, when you can't convince the Washington Times and Fox News and Newsmax, as much as we enjoyed having Pete Hegseth at one of our luncheons. By the way, we lost all sorts of money on it because nobody knew who he was. Everybody knows who he is now. But I just think that is, again, one of your favorite lines, a bridge too far, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And then, of course, we also had the administration, which decided to, which included somebody from the Atlantic, an editor from the Atlantic owned their, wasn't Instagram, was it Telegram? Was it?
Telegram, I think it right, but you may be right.
On
I can't remember for sure.
Group chat,
yes,
and
Telegram, I think.
Sent it out there, and they were very upset with the Atlantic for publishing these things. On the other hand, that wasn't even somebody trying to sniff it out. That was handed to him.
So, again, what you say on social media, that's a principle we just talked about a few minutes ago, because indeed, how not to be caught saying hideous things, but also how not to be caught saying things that maybe violate national security. So there are some very important lessons here, but we're going to take a break. We come back, we obviously, of course, play the piece by Penna Dexter. It's entitled America's Boy Crisis. Might get a few comments around the table. And then, of course, we always like to give you some prayer targets. Of course, our Pray for America this week gets into some of those issues, but we'll talk about some of those having to do with the Supreme Court and other court cases right after this.
The New York Times recently published an opinion piece about America's boy crisis. It's by social scientist Richard Reeves and Harvard political scientist and author of Bowling Alone, Robert Putnam. Here's their summary of the problem. Since 2010, suicide rates among young men have risen by a third. They are now higher than they are among middle-aged men. The share of college degrees going to men has fallen to 41%, lower than the women's share in 1970. 1 in 10 men aged 20 to 24 is effectively doing nothing, neither enrolled in school nor working. That's twice the rate in 1990. These issues merit more attention than they receive. Dr. Reeves and Professor Putnam say leaders sometimes fail to act for fear of being seen as somehow anti-woman. Now, they warn, alarm bells are ringing. Dr. Reeves delves into young men's social struggles in his book of Boys and Men, and now in this op-ed, reporting that they're less involved in civic organizations and even family life than their elders were. A recent Gallup poll asked young men aged 15 to 34 if they had experienced loneliness a lot on the previous day. 25% said they had. 1 in 7 said they have no close friends. 3% said this in 1990. Detached, socially isolated young men can become susceptible to reactionary voices online. Dr. Reeves and Professor Putnam warn that they're vulnerable to totalitarian ideology and appeals to violence. The authors point us back to what in the 1900s was called the boy problem. The solution was to build male-centered organizations to equip boys to become good men. Today, civic organizations are struggling. Organizations founded strictly for boys are now co-ed or no longer exist. Most YMCA members are female. Boy Scouts is now Scouting America. Thankfully, many young men are turning to churches. Perhaps their leaders can find wisdom in what worked 100 years ago. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and as we say, this is a live show, and it turns out just a minute ago, Jeff Mateer received some word that we will talk about in a minute, but to be fair, since we were encouraging you maybe to even listen to the commentary by Penna Dexter, it has the title, America's Boy Crisis. Mine today is on the issue of classical apologetics. We'll maybe talk about that next week, but she raises a very important question, and one that we've talked about many times before. We see increase in suicide rates and of frustrations, and the share of young boys, young men, if you want to say, that graduate or even go to college, much less graduate from college, has dropped precipitously. They're just a really significant number of concerns, and I'm hoping that there are a couple of ways to turn that around. First, of course, she talks about the Boy Scouts and things of that nature. I would certainly say the number of young boys and now young men in Generation Z that are going back to church, pretty significant numbers. So there may be some ways. And of course, our December issue of Outlook are we even on the edge of a revival? So there could be some things that would be positive, but she really gives you some facts and figures. And I would say that getting her commentary, of course, you can pull it off right now on the website, but we automatically send out my commentary to your inbox Monday through Friday. And you can just click on that button that says never miss a viewpoint. And I would encourage some of you to sign up for those. Mine come to your inbox Monday through Friday. Hers comes on Saturday. And this issue of the boy crisis is pretty significant, and that is something we've talked about before, Dr. Matthews.
It is, and especially the way things have just evolved with the Boy Scouts. I mean, just imagine this. And so you had to create a new group called Trail Life, I believe,
yes,
which is meant to be something to take boys back to where they should be in terms of just what boys ought to be doing and raising young boys to be young men.
Well, again, just some very important issues that she has identified. You can find out more on the website at pointofview.net. And first of all, I want to say thank you, Buddy Matthews, for actually covering one of the programs last week. But you have one coming up with Phil Graham pretty much in the future. I know next week we have got Dr. Carl Truman on talking about some very important things. Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, a number of others, even have a number of other guests, including the Next Generation Roundtable. But let me come to you, Jeff, because we were talking about we need a time when the Supreme Court can hear this case of Gabe Olivier, and you just got this on your phone.
Yeah, I just got a text and then an email that the court decided to issue its calendar. So apparently they're still working at the Supreme Court. They've not been shut down.
That's good.
Which is good. So Gabe Olivier's case is going to be heard on the morning of December 3rd. So Wednesday, December 3rd will be a big day for Gabe Olivier, big day for First Liberty, big day for our volunteer attorney, Allison Ho, who will be arguing the case on behalf of Gabe. And, of course, Kelly will be there, sitting right there with them. And Gabe will get his day in court, so to speak. And so that's exciting. And if folks prayed a little bit ago, then that prayer was answered for the date. Now we will pray for successful arguments and a successful decision for the evangelist Gabe Olivier.
So again, very good. What are some others that we should think about? Of course, we already mentioned that that was the case, but you're hoping that there will be another case that the Supreme Court will consider, right?
Right. Yeah. We're praying as the court right now is considering our case representing the Florida Christian school, Cambridge Christian, that whether they can pray over a speaker, a public PA system in a public setting. So we're praying for that the court will take that. And then we're praying for our Amish case, representing a group of Amish families who don't want to have their kids vaccinated in order so they could go to their own little school in the state of New York. So both of those are major prayer requests.
Could the Supreme Court say on something like the Florida case, did you not see what we said in Coach Kennedy and just kind of let it go?
Now, and there's something called that they can do that, and they can say we're not gonna hear the case because you're such, you didn't follow our law. Hey, follow it, and that's happened in our Klein case, the Oregon bakers, and the court now has told the state of Oregon twice to follow their precedents. The problem is the state of Oregon refuses to follow their precedents, so we're three times. But yes, they can. It's called a summary disposition. often I'll charge you something for teaching that term.
Well, again, just some very important cases that are coming up here. And I think just as we wind down here, we do have some elections coming up, and they may be kind of insignificant for most individuals. I'm looking right now at all of these constitutional propositions that, for example, in the state of Texas, we need to vote for. But as I went through there
or
and
against,
started,
depending on what they are.
Right? Yeah. And I've seen some people that say vote for most, but vote against 6. I see others saying vote for all but 2 and things like that. But, even I've noticed, for example, I'll just use a good example. The lieutenant governor actually has come out in favor of Proposition 1 and 11. And I thought, boy, in some respects, let's educate our listeners that even when you look at these propositions, or a few of you are going to be electing governors and lieutenant governors and all sorts of other things, there are still some really important issues, and we certainly need to show up at the polls, don't we?
No, absolutely. And to be educated, because think about how few people, certainly on this type of election, how few people actually go to the polls. And so I know in a lot of local communities, for instance, in my local community, the school system wants, they're not calling it a tax increase, but what Rockwall is doing is increasing taxes and want you to vote for it. And of course, it's always, for the children.
Right, the children.
For the children, you vote for it. And we voted it down 2 years ago. They just repackaged it. It's just a new PR campaign. But people need to know that. And I think in your local communities, whatever it is, one is you do need to vote, but do so educated. And so there are great groups. In Texas Values. Yes. Our friend Jonathan Sines does a great job. But in every state now there are family policy groups who you can go to and get the information. But be an educated voter. Vote. Certainly vote, but be educated.
And we should say that even a politician that you normally just trust to do the right thing sometimes comes out in the wrong decision. And remember, Rick Perry came out with the HPV vaccine, the human papillomavirus. He wanted to mandate that. And there was so much pushback as governor, when he was governor, that he backed away from that. Sometimes even politicians that you normally say, I agree with you 95, 98% of the time, sometimes they'll do something that you think, wait a minute, you shouldn't be doing that. And that's one of the reasons why you may want to vote against something that a politician supports.
If you were listening yesterday, we certainly talked with a young man, and I have a car almost as old as him, and yet here he is running already. He's run once for the Texas legislature, and he started actually helping canvass particular precincts at the age of 12. Well, I did too. When my father ran for the California Assembly at the age of 12, I was actually going and marking around precincts. So you're never too young to get involved. And I really do believe there was a good piece this week that talks about this nursing home called the United States Senate, because they was going through this list of individuals that are older than I am. And I'm old. But they're even older. And it's just about time we need to get some younger people involved. One of the reasons we'll be talking about that this next week on the Next Generation Roundtable. So that is great. Dr. Merrill Matthews and certainly Jeff Mateer, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you.
I also want to thank Megan for her help. She's been engineering the program. Steve, I want to thank you for producing the program. But don't forget, next week we will be getting into a number of other very important issues. Sooner or later, we'll see if the prediction from Jeff Mateer is true. We will eventually not have a government shutdown, and we'll certainly be covering that as well. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.